Our first 9 lessons have introduced us to the places in a sentence. We know where the subject, the X word, the M and the Y places are. We also know the places inside the Y, the verb, the particle, object, and complement places. We've practiced identifying noun phrases, adjective phrases, prepositional phrases, verb phrases, with time, no time, etc. We've talked about traces, we've talked about ties. Of course, there are more topics that still remain, but I'd say right now we have an excellent view of the structure of English. So let's continue, and now we're ready to start to look at ways, and we're going to look at one way that phrases can be combined together. Lesson 10 introduces one way of combining sentences by including or embedding one sentence inside another. For example, a trunk is the smallest possible sentence. It's a subject and a predicate, and a trunk can have a shifter. If we take a look in our trunk here, we see that her family was watching TV is a trunk. And looking at the shifter, I see Susie came home is another trunk. So really the sentence above over here contains 2 smaller sentences or trunks. Susie came home and her family was watching TV. However, in the actual sentence, her family was watching TV when Susie came home, the trunk is her family was watching TV. This is the trunk, this is the main part of the sentence, because this is where we ask the yes or no question. Was her family watching TV when Susie came home? And the shifter contains the other included trunk, Susie came home. Now, Susie came home is included as a shifter by using the includer when. I didn't just drop the trunk in the shifter place. I added the word when, that's the includer, and the includer let me put in the trunk as a shifter. The resulting phrase, when Susie came home, is called an included sentence, and this one that we have here is named an adverbial included sentence. We're just going to abbreviate it AIS because the included sentence is in the shifter place. So from now on, every time we find an included sentence in the shifter place, we're going to call it an adverbial included sentence. And adverbial included sentences provide information about time, reason, concession, which means opposite relationships, and condition. One thing is true depending on another thing. So let's take a look at some examples. That's always the best way to do this. So here's an adverbial included sentence. It provides information about time, reason, concession, and condition. And for example, Jill eats lunch after she finishes her math class. This included sentence, and I know because of the includer after, creates a time relationship between these two sentences. So I see that the shifter tells me that the eats lunch is after she finishes her math class. Included sentences in the shifter place also give information about reason, and then the includer is because. Because her math class ends at 2 p.m., she's always starved. She's always starved. This is the reason, because her math class ends at 2 p.m. Adverbial included sentences also talk about concession, and concession means that the idea in the trunk is actually opposite the idea in the included sentence. So for example, she does not bring a snack even though it's suggested by the teacher. It just doesn't make sense, right? Also, adverbial included sentences create conditions. One part is true if the other part is true. So for example, using the includer if she feels hungry next week, she will bring a sandwich to class. This is true if the condition is true. In common adverbial includers for time are when, while, after, before, since, and until. Includers for reason are because, as, and since. Concession, even though, although. Condition, if and unless. And all of these includers are used to create adverbial and included sentences which are found in the shifter place. So let's take a look and see, are we really able to analyze an adverbial included sentence? And you can imagine the answer is yes. When analyzing an adverbial included sentence, we follow the exact same steps as analyzing a trunk after first cutting off the includer. For example, I'll show you what I mean. Jill eats lunch when she finishes math class. Shifter, when she finishes math class, Jill eats lunch. And let's take a look at our trunk. Does Jill eat lunch when she finishes math class? Jill does not eat lunch. The subject is Jill. The predicate is eats lunch. The M place is empty. It follows the X place. And Y is eats lunch. Eats ties with Jill, the subject. Eats ties with the present. This is the S form. Y is a verb phrase with time. Our next step, let's analyze the Y. Eats lunch. I think I added too many C's in there. Eats is the verb. The particle place is empty. The object is lunch. That's a noun phrase. And the complement place is empty. Now we're actually able, we see that the shifter is an adverbial included sentence. We can label it adverbial included sentence. And let's rewrite it. When she finishes math class. So number one, let's cross off the includer and we can label it. This is an includer. It's not a question word when, it's just the includer. And once we take the includer away from the included sentence, we're left with the sentence, which means that we already know how to analyze a sentence. We always begin with the shifter. There's no shifters. So let's find the two X word places. Does she finish math class? She does not finish math class. She is the subject, the predicate, the M place, the Y place, and next comes the ties. Finishes with the subject, finishes with the present, S form. Y is a verb phrase with time. Rewrite the Y. finishes math class. And let's start to take a look at the why now. Verb is finishes. No particle. Place is empty. Math class is the object. It's a noun phrase, which is a complement. And we're done. Now, the interesting thing that we're going to see is that we actually have a pretty good idea of what English looks like now. And there's not really many new things we're going to see. We are going to see new combinations, but we're going to see combinations of phrases that we've already talked about. So this is kind of what we're kind of going towards in this direction. We're starting to see that languages, and English is a great example, are made from some basic pieces, and those pieces can be manipulated, they can be combined, sentences can be transformed and changed. But basically, we're always working with the same pieces falling into the same places. And I think you'll enjoy this as we continue now in the second half of our class to start to see the bigger picture of how English is really formed and how sentences are constructed and how ideas are created through all of this. So this is our introduction to Lesson 10. Now we're going to practice when we do the Lesson 10 classwork. Let's talk about anything that you may not be sure about or feel comfortable with before we continue.